When you entered the chapel, you received a sheet of paper with flow charts on both sides. Let's first look at the simpler flow chart titled Family Tree of United Methodism to review our direct line of Methodist descendancy and the several name changes of the Methodist denominations in our direct family line. This will provide background for the rest of the presentation. As most of you know, Methodism began in England with John Wesley, his brother Charles Wesley, and a group of their friends. John became an ordained priest in the Church of England. He was also an evangelist who was a principal leader of a revival movement within the Church of England known as Methodism. Methodism was brought to the American colonies in the 1760s by lay preachers and missionaries. Following the American Revolution, the Methodist Episcopal Church was formally established in America in 1784 at a conference in Baltimore, Maryland. Prior to the Civil War, the Methodist Episcopal Church split in two, primarily over the issue of slavery, in 1844, and our church's denomination became the Methodist Episcopal Church South. After a 1939 three-way merger with the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Protestant Church, our denomination became simply the Methodist Church. In 1968, after a merger with the Church of Evangelical United Brethren, our denomination became the United Methodist Church. This year we are celebrating. This is the 100th anniversary of the completion of the Charlottesville First United Methodist Church building. Although we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of our building, it is also notable that this year it has been 190 years since the first Methodist church building was completed in Charlottesville in 1835. At the time, Charlottesville was a town of only about 1,500 residents. Methodists are recorded in our region as early as 1770. At first, they met in homes, public houses, or outdoor camp meetings. Later, they met in the Albemarle County Courthouse, a building which still exists as the rear wing of the present courthouse. Religious services for Episcopal, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist worshipers were held in this building, which Jefferson called the Common Temple. The four Protestant denominations rotated responsibility for preparing the weekly church service. The Methodists built their first church in Charlottesville beginning in 1834 and completed it in 1835. The first church was located on the south side of Water Street, between 1st Street and 2nd Street Southwest. This church was known as the Methodist Episcopal Church. As I mentioned earlier, it has been 190 years since the very first Methodist church was completed in Charlottesville in 1835. This Methodist Episcopal Church was a brick structure that seated 350 worshipers. It is evident that they were planning for future growth of the congregation because at the time they had only 62 members. It was the general opinion in that era that musical instruments did not belong in a church, so there was no organ. In 1859, a mere 25 years after they built their first church, Charlottesville Methodists began building a new church at the corner of 2nd Street Southwest and Water Street. Construction was interrupted by the Civil War and was not completed until 1867. Afterward, they tore down their old church. At that time, they had 153 members. This new church was the Methodist Episcopal Church South and is sometimes referred to as the old Water Street Church.
Oh.
These early Methodists were obviously builders. In 1887, only 20 years after completing their second church building, they started renovating it by expanding the rear of the building, creating a steeper roof, replacing the windows, and adding new towers on the front of the church, one topped by a tall spire. During renovation of the sanctuary, they built balconies on 3 sides and added a pipe organ and choir loft. The renovation was completed in 1888. By then, the church membership was about 550. By 1914, membership had grown to 1,000, and Sunday school enrollment had increased to over 700. Note the pulpit that was in the First Methodist Episcopal Church South from 1859 to 1924. After being in storage for more than 3/4 of a century, it was restored and refinished by James R. Rowe Jarman, Sr., who was a member of our church. The restored pulpit was placed in our chapel after the building renovation of 1986.
Oh.
In 1897, First Church established a second congregation in Belmont as the Belmont Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church. That frame building was torn down after construction of the Hinton Avenue Methodist Church in 1909. This created a temporary decline in First Church membership, but the mother church recovered quickly and continued to grow. So, in 1921, First Methodists decided to build again, this time at 101 East Jefferson Street. This picture shows the building site of the new First Methodist Episcopal Church South, when it was still a vacant lot, which is indicated by the yellow arrow. At the top right in the picture is the First Baptist Church, where Queen Charlotte Square now stands. It was destroyed by fire in the 1970s. Note that the General Robert E. Lee statue had not been placed in Lee Park, now known as Market Street Park. Ground was broken for the present First Methodist Episcopal Church South in March 1923, and a year later, on March 31, 1924, the cornerstone was laid during a grand public ceremony. Notice that the sanctuary superstructure and window framing are already in place during the cornerstone laying ceremony. This is a much later picture of the front of First Methodist Episcopal Church South from the same perspective after completion of construction. The church is now known as Charlottesville First United Methodist Church. A marble plaque commemorating the 2 church buildings of the First Methodist Episcopal Church South from 1834 to 1923 was inserted into the brick wall on the front of the current church during construction. It can still be seen to the right of the front doors of the church when standing on the portico. The General Robert E. Lee statue was publicly unveiled on May 21, 1924. Notice that the First Methodist Episcopal Church South is under construction in the background, as indicated by the yellow arrow. Among the crowd, individuals in white hooded robes can be seen. The first worship service in the new church was held on November 1st, 1924 in the Social Hall, now known as the Fellowship Hall, because the sanctuary was not yet finished. This picture was taken in 1926 during a Carter Bible class Valentine's Day party in the Social Hall. The first worship service in the new sanctuary was held 13 months later, on the first Sunday of December 1925. At that time, the pulpit was in the center of the chancel, behind the communion table and communion railing, and there was no painting on the back wall. Capacity of the sanctuary at that time was said to be 975. In this photo from the late 1920s, again you can see that the pulpit was positioned in the center of the chancel. There was no transfiguration painting on the back wall. The walls were painted off-white with lines to simulate the outline of blocks of stone, and the pastors had comfortable leather-upholstered chairs, unlike today. Note, too, the dress of the choir members in robes and mortarboard headgear for the women. This is a picture of the sanctuary as it looked after adding Mrs. Ada Payne Quarles' reproduction of Raphael's Transfiguration. Mrs. Quarles painted the canvas in her backyard studio on Ridge Street. It was installed in 1930. The canvas was large, measuring more than 13 feet wide and 16 feet long. She knocked out walls in her studio for it to fit inside. There was a fire in the chancel in 1950 that damaged the painting and the organ. During the restoration which followed, the chancel was split so that the pulpit was located on one side and the lectern on the other side. Notice the sounding board, called a tester, hanging over the pulpit to amplify the voice of the preacher before we had a sound system. A sound system and air conditioning were installed in the sanctuary in 1978. The church sanctuary was again renovated in 2011. An AV room and a crying room were added under the balcony in the rear of the sanctuary. Note the new layout of movable furnishings in the chancel and the screens on either side for video projection. In 2013, Stephanie Newman restored the Transfiguration painting, which had sustained water and smoke damage during the 1950 chancel fire and had also faded after 83 years beneath the grime of age and the glare of lights. What a dramatic change from before. In this 1961 photo, we see houses at 112 and 114 East High Street behind the church. They were purchased by the church. One of them served for a time as the First Church parsonage. Today, the houses at 112 and 114 East High Street are gone, and those properties are the site of the church parking lot. We've been at 101 East Jefferson Street in the center of Charlottesville for 100 years, worshiping and praising God, ministering to the people in our community, and nurturing our brothers and sisters in Christ. 100 years and counting. Thanks be to God.